You are on HOA Neighbor Wars. I shoveled, she documented, and the fight escalated. I stepped onto my porch and nearly slid on black ice as Karen barked that my walkway was a slip hazard, and she was filing an emergency violation notice unless I fixed it in the next 10 minutes. This is not snow. It is non-compliance, she shouted, standing on my bottom step with a stack of chalk sticks in one hand like they were official instruments, and a clipboard wedged under her arm. I caught myself on the rail, ice cleats rattling on my belt loop, and stared at her. Judith Mitchell, Architectural Committee Chair for Stonehaven HOA, blonde hair whipping around her face in the wind-driven flurries, her gray parka zipped to the chin, and her pink knit hat pulled low. She looked furious. I looked at the black rubber snowmelt mat I had installed 2 days earlier, the one plugged into my outdoor outlet and keeping my steps clear while the rest of the block stayed buried under 4 inches of slush. The mat was doing its job. That was the problem. Judith tapped the clipboard with one chalk stick. You did not submit an application for exterior electrical equipment, she said. That mat is visible from the street, which makes it an architectural modification. You are in violation of Section 4.2, subsection D. I pointed out that it was a slip prevention device, not a permanent installation, and that I could unplug it and roll it up in 10 seconds. She shook her head. Intent does not matter. Visibility matters. You signed the covenants, now you live the covenants. She said it slowly, like she was explaining basic arithmetic to a child. I felt my jaw tighten. This was Newark, Delaware, in the middle of a February freeze that had the whole subdivision locked down under ice for a week straight. I work early mornings as an auto mechanic, sometimes starting at 5, and I needed a clear walkway because my daughter stays with me every other week and I was not going to let her slip on my porch. That custody routine was sacred to me, and Judith knew it. She had seen my daughter dropped off, had watched us carry bags in and out, and now she was targeting the one piece of winter gear that kept us both safe. Judith pulled a folded notice from her clipboard and held it out. This is your formal citation, she said. You have 72 hours to remove the device and submit a compliance photo, or the fine escalates to $200 per day. I took the paper. It was printed on Stonehaven HOA letterhead, dated today, and signed by her in blue ink. The violation code she cited was real, but the application of it was absurd. The mat was not a fence, not a shed, not a permanent deck addition. It was a winter safety tool. I told her that. She smiled, the kind of smile that does not reach the eyes. Make it public, I love watching people get embarrassed, she said. Then she turned and walked down my driveway, chalk sticks still in hand, her boots crunching through the frozen slush. I watched her stop at the curb and take a photo of my house with her phone, angling it to capture the mat and the snow piled along my walk. She did not look back. I stood there, notice in hand, wind stinging my face, and realized she was building a case. I went inside and read the notice 3 times. The violation date was listed as February 7th, but today was February 9th. That meant she had supposedly observed the violation 2 days ago, the day I installed the mat, but she was only delivering the notice now. The timeline felt wrong. I opened my phone and scrolled back through my security camera footage. The mat went live at 3:15 in the afternoon on the 7th. Judith had walked past my house at 4:30 that same day, visible in the frame, for 6 seconds. And she had not stopped, had not knocked, had not said a word. If she had observed a violation then, why wait 48 hours to issue the notice? I screenshotted the timestamp and saved it to a new folder labeled Evidence. I did not know yet what I would do with it, but I knew I wanted a record. My phone battery was dying in the cold and I needed to capture evidence fast, so I plugged it into the kitchen charger and started copying every relevant clip to cloud storage. That took 20 minutes. When I finished, I called my buddy Eric, a local journalist contact who covers municipal politics and HOA disputes for a regional news blog. He answered on the second ring. Eric listened while I explained the mat, the notice, and the weird delay. He asked if I had checked the HOA covenants for the exact wording of Section 4.2. I had not. He told me to pull the documents and look for any carve-outs for safety equipment or temporary installations. He also told me to document everything, every interaction, every email, every notice, because HOA boards in Delaware have a bad habit of changing their story once they realize someone is paying attention. He said one more thing before he hung up. If she is targeting your custody schedule, that is harassment, and you need to say it out loud in writing so there is a record. I thanked him and pulled up the covenant PDF on my laptop. Section 4.2 did cover exterior modifications, but subsection D specifically referenced permanent alterations to the structure or landscaping. The mat was neither. It was plugged in, not bolted down. It could be removed in seconds. I wrote a short email to the Stonehaven HOA Management Company, copying Judith, stating that I disputed the violation on the grounds that the mat was temporary safety equipment, and requesting clarification on how the rule applied to winter slip prevention. I attached a photo of the mat and a screenshot of the covenant text. I hit send and waited. The reply came 6 hours later, not from management but from Judith directly. She wrote that the mat constituted an unapproved electrical installation and that temporary status did not exempt it from review. She also wrote that my email tone was confrontational and that further communication should go through the formal hearing process. She attached a second notice, this one scheduling a compliance hearing for February 15th, 6 days away, and listing potential penalties including fines, legal fees, and possible lien filing if I failed to appear. The hearing notice was dated February 8th, 1 day before she delivered the first notice to my door. That was impossible. She could not have scheduled a hearing before delivering the initial violation. I took another screenshot and added it to the evidence folder. I did not correct her lie, because I wanted her to commit to it in public. That was the moment I decided to hold my cards and let her keep talking. The next morning I woke up to two neighbors standing on the sidewalk in front of my house, whispering and pointing at my steps. Both held small salt buckets and scoops, the kind you use for spot treatment on walkways. I grabbed my coat and went outside. One of them, a guy named Marcus who lived 3 doors down, waved me over. He said Judith had been going door to door the night before, telling people that my snow melt mat was creating a drainage hazard and that the HOA was going to have to salt my steps without permission so they could claim I did it wrong. He said she had a whole speech prepared about liability and how my negligence was going to cost the association money. The other neighbor, an older woman named Linda, nodded and said Judith had shown her a photo on her phone, a close-up of my mat with slush pooled around the edges, and claimed it was flooding onto the sidewalk. Linda said it was obvious the photo had been taken from just inches away to make the puddle look worse than it was. She told Judith it looked fine to her and shut the door. Marcus said he did the same. I thanked them both and asked if they would be willing to write down what Judith said, just a short email to me summarizing her claims. They both agreed. I went back inside and added their names to a witness list. That afternoon I got a call from an attorney. He introduced himself as representing Stonehaven HOA in matters of covenant enforcement and said he was reaching out as a courtesy before formal action was taken. He said my refusal to remove the mat was creating a safety and legal exposure for the association, and that if I did not comply by end of business Friday, the HOA would proceed with emergency removal at my expense, plus administrative fees and legal costs. He quoted a total of $1,500. I asked him to send everything in writing. He paused, then said he would, but that I should understand this was a final opportunity to resolve it informally. I said I understood and hung up. The letter arrived by email 30 minutes later. It was 2 pages, full of bluff language meant to scare me into paying instantly, and it referenced the same incorrect violation date from Judith's first notice. The attorney had not checked her paperwork. He had just copied her timeline. I forwarded the letter to Eric and asked him what he thought. He called me back within the hour and said the letter was a pressure tactic and that no attorney would file for emergency removal over a snowmat without a court order, which would take weeks. He said to respond in writing, state that I disputed all claims, and request copies of any photos or evidence the HOA planned to use at the hearing. He also said to mention the custody schedule explicitly, so it was on record that the mat was tied to my daughter's safety. I drafted the reply and sent it that night. Friday came and nothing happened. No removal crew, no follow-up call, no new notice. I kept the mat plugged in and running. My daughter came over that evening for her week with me, and we spent the weekend inside while the temperature dropped into the teens. The mat kept the steps clear. On Monday, I got an email from the HOA management company, finally responding to my original dispute. The property manager, a woman named Claire, wrote that she had reviewed my file and noted several discrepancies in the documentation provided by the board. She said she would be attending the February 15th hearing in person to ensure procedural compliance. That was the first sign that someone other than Judith was paying attention. I wrote back thanking her and asking if I could submit evidence in advance. She said yes and gave me an email address for the hearing file. I spent that evening compiling everything: the covenant text with the relevant section highlighted, the security camera timestamps showing Judith walking past my house without stopping on the 7th, the email chain with the mismatched dates, the attorney letter repeating the same error, and the neighbors' statements from Marcus and Linda. I also included a short narrative explaining that the mat was installed to protect my daughter during her custody weeks, and that I was willing to remove it once the ice risk passed, but not under threat of fabricated violations. I attached it all as a single PDF and hit send. Tuesday morning, I woke up to a voicemail from Judith. She sounded furious. She said I had violated HOA protocol by submitting evidence directly to management without board approval, and that my behavior was now being treated as insubordination. She said the hearing would proceed as scheduled, and that I should expect additional penalties for procedural violations. I saved the voicemail and forwarded it to Eric. He laughed and said she was spiraling. He told me to stay quiet, let her keep talking, and show up to the hearing with printed copies of everything. He also said I should bring a witness if possible. I called Marcus and asked if he would come. He said yes. Wednesday passed without incident. Thursday afternoon, I checked my mailbox and found a new notice, this one printed on plain paper instead of HOA letterhead, claiming that the HOA had attempted to salt my steps on Tuesday morning as a courtesy safety measure, and that I had refused access. That was a lie. No one had come to my property. I checked the camera footage for the entire day. Nothing. I added the false notice to the evidence file and made a note that it was undated and unsigned. Friday was February 15th. The hearing was scheduled for 7 in the evening at the Stonehaven Clubhouse, a small building at the front of the subdivision with a meeting room and a kitchenette. I arrived 15 minutes early with Marcus. The room was set up with a folding table at the front and chairs arranged in rows. Judith sat at the table with 2 other board members, a man named Todd and a woman named Angela. Claire, the property manager, sat off to the side with a laptop open. There were maybe a dozen other homeowners scattered in the chairs, most of them looking bored or annoyed. Judith saw me walk in and her expression hardened. She had a roll of yellow caution tape sitting on the table in front of her, coiled neatly like it was evidence. I recognized it immediately. She had used that tape 2 weeks earlier to block off a section of sidewalk near the mailboxes after a minor ice patch formed, then left it up for 3 days and sent an email blast about slip liability. It was her signature move, turning small problems into dramatic safety crises so she could play hero. I sat down in the front row. Marcus sat beside me. Judith called the meeting to order. If you are enjoying this HOA chaos, hit like and subscribe for more wild neighborhood drama and satisfying justice stories. She read the violation summary aloud, repeating the February 7th date and claiming I had installed unapproved electrical equipment that posed a drainage and liability risk. She held up a printed photo, the same staged close-up Linda had described, showing the slush pooled around the mat edges. She said the photo was taken on February 8th, the day after the violation was observed. Todd, the other board member, asked if there was any documentation of prior complaints or incidents related to the mat. Judith said no, but that the violation was clear under the covenants, and that my refusal to comply demonstrated a pattern of disregard for community standards. Angela, the third board member, looked uncomfortable. She glanced at Claire, who was typing quietly on her laptop. Claire did not look up. I raised my hand and asked if I could present my evidence. Judith said I would have an opportunity to speak after the board completed its review. I nodded and waited. She continued for another 10 minutes, repeating the same points and adding new accusations, including the fake claim that the HOA had tried to salt my steps and been denied access. She said that refusal created additional liability and justified escalated penalties. When she finally paused, Claire spoke up. Claire said she had reviewed the file and noted that the violation notice, the hearing notice, and the attorney letter all contained conflicting dates. She asked Judith to clarify when the violation was first observed and when the initial notice was delivered. Judith hesitated, then said the observation was on the 7th and the notice was hand-delivered on the 9th. Claire asked why the hearing notice was dated the 8th, 1 day before the initial notice was delivered. Judith said it was a clerical error and that the dates should be disregarded in favor of the photographic evidence. Claire said that was not how procedure worked and that date discrepancies suggested incomplete documentation. She asked if there was any video or secondary evidence to support the timeline. Judith said no, that her word as committee chair was sufficient. Claire did not respond. She looked at me and asked if I had anything to add. I stood up, walked to the front, and handed her a printed packet. I also gave copies to Todd and Angela. Judith reached for one, but I did not give her a copy. I said she already had all the information. I walked them through the packet page by page. First, the covenant text showing that Section 4.2 subsection D applied to permanent alterations, not temporary safety equipment. Second, the security camera timestamps proving Judith walked past my house on the 7th without stopping or delivering a notice. Third, the email chain showing the mismatched dates across 3 separate documents. Fourth, the attorney letter repeating the same incorrect violation date, proving the attorney had not independently verified the claim. Fifth, the fake notice about refused access, paired with camera footage showing no one had approached my property on the alleged date. Sixth, the witness statements from Marcus and Linda describing Judith going door to door with a staged photo and false claims about drainage hazards. I also included a short statement explaining that the mat was installed to protect my daughter during her custody weeks, and that targeting my safety measures felt like harassment tied to my schedule. When I finished, The room was silent. Todd flipped back through the pages. Angela stared at Judith. Claire was still typing. Judith's face had gone pale. She started to speak, then stopped. She picked up the caution tape and set it back down. She said the evidence was taken out of context and that I was twisting procedure to avoid accountability. Claire cut her off. She said the documentation clearly showed procedural failures and possible falsification of dates, and that the board needed to table the hearing pending an independent review. Todd nodded. Angela said she agreed. Judith stood up, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. "Make it public. I love watching people get embarrassed," I said quietly, repeating her words from the porch. Her mouth opened, but nothing came out. She grabbed the caution tape and walked out of the room. The hearing ended 5 minutes later with no decision, and a note that Claire would conduct a full-file audit and report back to the board within 2 weeks. That should have been the end of it, but Judith was not done. The next morning I found a new notice taped to my front door, printed on plain paper with no HOA logo, claiming that the board had voted to impose immediate fines pending the audit and that I owed $400 by end of week or face lien filing. The notice was unsigned and undated. I photographed it, sent it to Claire, and called Eric. He said it was retaliation and likely fake, given that the board had tabled the hearing and Claire was conducting an audit. He said to ignore it and let Claire handle it. I did. 2 days later, I got a call from Claire. She said the audit was complete and that she had found multiple irregularities in Judith's enforcement files, including backdated notices, altered photos, and fabricated compliance reports. She said the board was meeting an emergency session that evening, and that Judith had been asked to attend. She also said I should expect a formal resolution within 48 hours. I thanked her and waited. The resolution came by email on Monday. The board voted to rescind all penalties related to the snowmat, issue a formal apology for procedural failures, and remove Judith from her role as architectural committee chair effective immediately. The email also stated that Judith was required to submit a written retraction of her claims about the mat and about my alleged refusal of access, and that the retraction would be sent to all homeowners in the next newsletter. The board implemented a new policy banning enforcement actions during winter months, unless tied to genuine safety hazards verified by a third party, with penalties for violations including removal from the board and legal liability. I was issued a fine waiver in writing with a firm no-contact directive barring Judith from initiating any further complaints or communications related to my property without board approval. The directive carried a $500 penalty per violation. I saved the email and forwarded it to Eric, Marcus, and Linda. Marcus replied with a thumbs-up emoji. Linda wrote back saying she was glad someone finally stood up to Judith. Eric called me that afternoon and said he wanted to write a piece about it for his blog. I said yes. But Judith was not finished. 3 days after the board resolution, I was driving home from work in the early morning dark when I saw her standing in the gas station lot at the edge of the subdivision, holding her phone up and filming the entrance. I slowed down and pulled into the lot. She did not lower the phone. I parked and got out. She stayed where she was, about 20 feet away, phone still pointed at me. I asked her what she was doing. She said she was documenting traffic violations at the subdivision entrance because multiple residents had complained about speeding. I asked if she was filming me specifically. She said she was filming everyone and that I should not take it personally unless I had something to hide. Her voice was tight and shaky, like she was barely holding it together. I told her the board directive prohibited her from targeting me. She said she was not targeting me, she was enforcing community safety, and that the directive did not apply to public areas. I pulled out my own phone and started recording. She lowered hers immediately and said I was harassing her. I said I was documenting her behavior the same way she was documenting mine. She said she would call the sheriff. I said, "Go ahead." She did. A deputy arrived 15 minutes later, pulling into the lot with his lights off. Judith was still standing near the entrance, arms crossed, phone in her pocket. I was leaning against my truck with my phone in hand. The deputy, a middle-aged guy with a tired expression, asked what was going on. Judith spoke first. She said I had followed her to the gas station, confronted her while she was conducting HOA business, and threatened her with my phone. I said that was not true and offered to show him my recording. He nodded. I played the clip. It showed exactly what happened. Me pulling in, asking what she was doing, her claiming she was filming traffic, me starting to record, her accusing me of harassment. The deputy watched the whole thing, then turned to Judith and asked if she had been instructed by the HOA board to film at the entrance. She hesitated, then said no, but that she had a right to document safety concerns. The deputy said she did, but that standing in a gas station lot at 6 in the morning filming cars did not constitute HOA business, and that if she felt threatened, she should leave the area. He asked if either of us wanted to file a report. I said no. Judith said no. The deputy told us both to go home and left. Judith got in her car and drove away without looking at me. I went home and sent the recording to Claire with a short note explaining what happened. She replied an hour later saying the incident would be added to Judith's file and that the board would discuss further action at the next meeting. 2 weeks passed. The snow started to melt. Temperatures climbed into the 40s during the day, and the ice on the sidewalks turned to slush and then to wet pavement. I unplugged the snow melt mat and rolled it up, storing it in the garage. My daughter went back to her mother's house for her week, and I settled into a quiet routine of work and waiting. The board met again in early March and issued a second resolution. Judith was removed from the board entirely, effective immediately, and barred from holding any HOA leadership position for 3 years. The resolution also included a formal finding that she had engaged in selective enforcement, falsified documentation, and retaliated against a homeowner in violation of board policy. The association agreed to refund all fines and fees I had incurred during the dispute, totaling $600, and issued a written apology to be included in the next 2 newsletters. The new policy on winter enforcement was expanded to include a ban on retaliatory actions tied to custody schedules, tenant activity, or other protected personal circumstances, with mandatory third-party review for any enforcement action involving those factors. I got a check in the mail 10 days later. I cashed it and bought a new set of winter tools, including a better snow shovel and a spare set of ice cleats. Judith stopped showing up to HOA meetings. I heard from Marcus that she had been complaining to neighbors about a witch hunt and a vendetta, but no one was listening. Linda told me Judith had tried to organize a petition to overturn the board decision, but she could not get more than 3 signatures. By mid-March, the whole thing had blown over in the neighborhood, replaced by the usual spring complaints about landscaping and mailbox paint. I kept working, kept my head down, and kept the security cameras running. Eric published his piece in late March. He titled it, "How One HOA Chair Faked Violations to Punish a Single Dad and Got Caught." It included most of the details from my evidence file, interviews with Marcus and Linda, and a statement from Claire confirming the audit findings. The piece got picked up by a couple of regional outlets and generated a small flood of comments from people with similar HOA horror stories. Judith did not respond publicly, but I heard through Marcus that she had threatened to sue Eric for defamation. Eric told me he was not worried. The facts were solid. April came and the ice was gone. The sidewalks dried out, the snowbanks shrank to dirty gray piles in parking lot corners, and the neighborhood started prepping for summer. I got an email from the new architectural committee chair, a retired teacher named Bill, asking if I had any concerns about the upcoming warm weather rules review. I said no. He thanked me and said the board was committed to fair enforcement and that he appreciated my patience during the transition. I believed him. The HOA stopped selective enforcement after complaints piled up, and the new winter policy became a model that Claire started recommending to other associations she managed. She sent me a thank you note in May saying my documentation had helped her push for policy reforms across multiple communities. I saved the note. My daughter came back for her week in early May, and we spent the weekend planting flowers in the front yard. She asked me why there was caution tape in the garage trash can. I told her it was left over from a winter project. She shrugged and went back to digging. Judith moved out in June. I saw the for sale sign go up one morning while I was leaving for work. The house sold in 3 weeks, faster than I expected. Marcus told me she had taken a job in Pennsylvania and wanted a fresh start. I did not ask for details. The new owners were a young couple with a dog, and they waved every time they saw me. They never mentioned the HOA. By July, the whole drama felt like it had happened years ago instead of months. I kept the evidence folder on my laptop, backed up in 3 places just in case. Eric kept the blog post live. Every few weeks someone would leave a new comment, usually a variation of "I had the same thing happen" or "HOAs are out of control." I read them all, but I did not reply. I had said what I needed to say. In August, I got one more email from Judith. It was short and formal. She wrote that she was sorry for any inconvenience caused by the winter enforcement actions and that she hoped we could both move forward. She did not admit fault. She did not mention the falsified dates or the retaliation or the gas station confrontation. She just said sorry and signed her name. I read it twice, then deleted it. I did not need her apology. I had already won. Karen was forced to retract her claim in writing, the HOA stopped selective enforcement after complaints piled up, and the funny karma beat happened when her smug smile vanished and the room turned on her during that hearing, right after I repeated her own words back to her in front of everyone. The policy reforms stuck. The new board kept the winter rules in place through the next season and expanded them to cover other enforcement gray areas. Claire told me in a follow-up email that Stonehaven had become one of the most procedurally compliant associations she managed, and that the changes had reduced complaints by more than 60%. I took that as a win. I still live in the same house. My daughter still comes every other week, and we still plant flowers and shovel snow and live our lives without looking over our shoulders. The snow melt mat is in the garage, ready for next winter. The ice cleats are clipped to my coat. The security cameras are still running, and if anyone ever tries to pull the same stunt again, I have a playbook that works. Document everything, stay calm, let them commit to the lie, then show the receipts when it counts. That is the lesson. Judith taught it to me the hard way, and I will not forget it. The fall came and went without incident. The leaves turned, the temperatures dropped, and the first frost appeared on windshields in November. I pulled out the snow melt mat and tested it in the garage to make sure it still worked. It did. I bought a new bag of salt and a backup scoop. I checked the security camera batteries and made sure the cloud storage was set to auto-upload. I was ready. December brought the first snow, just a dusting that melted by noon, but I knew the real stuff was coming. The forecast showed a winter storm rolling in before Christmas, the kind that dumps 6 to 8 inches overnight and shuts down the whole region. I cleared the garage, organized the winter tools, and set a calendar reminder to plug in the mat as soon as the snow started. My daughter was scheduled to stay with me for the holiday week, and I wanted the steps clear and safe before she arrived. That was the priority. That was always the priority. The storm hit on December 22nd. It started as light flurries in the afternoon and turned into heavy snow by evening. I plugged in the mat at 6 and watched through the window as the steps stayed clear while the rest of the block disappeared under white. My daughter arrived the next morning, her mother dropping her off in a careful, slow drive through the unplowed streets. She stepped onto the porch without slipping, dragging her suitcase behind her, and gave me a hug. I asked her how the drive was. She said it was fine, but slow. I asked if she wanted hot chocolate. She said yes. We went inside and spent the rest of the day watching movies and playing board games while the snow piled up outside. The mat kept working. The steps stayed clear. The neighborhood stayed quiet. No one knocked on my door. No one left a notice. No one filed a complaint. The HOA had learned its lesson. By mid-January, the winter was settling into a rhythm. Snow fell, the mat cleared the steps, I shoveled the walk, and life continued. The HOA sent out a newsletter in late January highlighting the new enforcement policies and thanking homeowners for their cooperation during the winter season. There was no mention of Judith. There was no mention of violations, or hearings, or disputes. It was just a standard update about snow removal guidelines and a reminder to keep walkways clear for safety. I read it and filed it away. Marcus texted me a screenshot of the newsletter with a laughing emoji. I sent back a thumbs up. Linda stopped me at the mailbox one afternoon and said she was glad things had calmed down. I told her I was too. She said the neighborhood felt different now, less tense, like people were not walking on eggshells anymore. I agreed. The new board had changed the tone. The new policies had changed the culture. And the old drama was finally, completely, over. February came around again, 1 year after the whole mess started. I woke up on the 7th, the anniversary of the day I installed the mat, and looked out the window at the snow-covered street. The mat was plugged in and working. The steps were clear. My daughter was asleep in the guest room. Everything was exactly as it should be. I made coffee and sat at the kitchen table, scrolling through my phone, and saw a new email from Claire. She was writing to let me know that the Stonehaven Board had voted to adopt a Homeowner Bill of Rights, a formal document outlining due process protections, appeal procedures, and anti-retaliation policies. The document was modeled on the reforms implemented after my case, and Claire said it was now being used as a template for other associations across the state. She thanked me again for my role in pushing for change and said she hoped the new protections would prevent future disputes. I wrote back thanking her for her work and for taking the audit seriously. Then I closed the laptop and finished my coffee. The rest of the winter passed without drama. March brought the thaw, April brought the cleanup, May brought the flowers, and by June I had put the mat back in the garage for another season, knowing it would be there when I needed it. The evidence folder stayed on my laptop, backed up and ready, but I did not expect to need it again. The HOA had learned, the board had changed, the policies were in place, and I had proven that standing up to bad enforcement was not just possible, it was necessary. That was the real win. Not the refund, not the apology, not even the policy changes. The real win was showing that you could fight back without breaking the rules. That documentation and patience and stubbornness could beat intimidation and bluffing and fake paperwork every single time. Judith had tried to use the system against me, and the system had turned on her instead. That was justice. That was karma. That was exactly how it should work. I still see Marcus and Linda around the neighborhood. We wave, we chat about the weather, we complain about potholes and plow damage like normal neighbors do. The new couple in Judith's old house joined the garden club and started hosting cookouts in the summer. The subdivision feels quieter now, less like a battlefield and more like a place where people just live. The HOA still exists, still sends newsletters, still enforces rules, but it does it fairly now, with process and accountability and a recognition that homeowners have rights too. That is all I ever wanted. That is all any of us should expect. And if it takes a fight to get there, if it takes months of stress and paperwork and confrontations in gas station parking lots, then that is what it takes. Because the alternative is letting people like Judith run unchecked, turning neighborhoods into fiefdoms, and making everyone else miserable just because they can. I was not willing to let that happen. I stood my ground, I kept my receipts, and I won. And I would do it again if I had to. I will talk to you again soon.